And we are back. Welcome back to the King's Report, Tuesday, November 28, 2017. It is a fine, beautiful autumn day this day. Second King reporting live from the Chanigung Palace Studios to all the kings and queens of the Kingdom of God. Good morning. It is 7:15 now on our broadcast, and we are joined with founder and CEO of Suidlanders of South Africa. Simon Roche is the head of the Office of Headquarters of the world's largest non-state civil defense organization, Suidlanders of South Africa. Once an ANC activist, he now works tirelessly to prepare for impending catastrophe in the Rainbow Nation. Simon lives in Johannesburg and is proud father of many, it says many children. How many children do you have, Simon?
I have 5 altogether.
5, okay, good. Yeah, we too, we have 5 as well. 4 boys and 1 girl.
Okay, I have 2 daughters and 3 sons.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. We've heard a lot about the work that you're doing. Can you give our listeners and audience a brief overview of what is happening in South Africa?
Well, speaking on behalf of Suidlanders, which is a civil defense organization constituted under international law, which will help people to understand what I'm about to say. In South Africa at the moment, there is a great deal of tension that is being brought on by an economic collapse. Our sovereign bonds have just been downgraded to double-D status. So we have an economic crisis. We have the highest crime rates in the world, certain crimes, rape, for example.
Wow.
1 in 3 women will be raped in her lifetime. 35% of all women will be raped in their lifetimes in South Africa, and that's a commonly accepted statistic generated by certain liberal sources, certainly not us.
Wow.
The rate of murder of white farmers in South Africa is the highest death rate of any occupation, job in the world. It is more dangerous in literal terms. And I would like to point out to your listeners that these are not statistics that we have generated. Not at all. The likelihood of a farmer in South Africa being murdered is statistically greater than the likelihood of an infantry soldier of the United States Army being killed in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Wow, that is mind-boggling. Just can you give us a little history in terms of South Africa and why it has become such a in the state that it is in currently?
Pastor, I think it's valuable for people to perhaps hear this one brief anecdote, and from that they can get a better idea of the reality of South Africa as opposed to the pretty picture that was painted by the globalist media in the transformation to democracy. And this is no defense of apartheid. As you know, I was an ANC activist. But Nelson Mandela spoke many times about Jesus Christ, and he stood on the steps of cathedrals, and he gave these sort of sermons, and people thought, oh, what a good man, and he loves the Lord, and it's terrific. However, it turned out shortly after his death, 3 of his peers revealed that he'd secretly remained a member of the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party up to the day of his death. So he concealed that.
Wow.
And the world still doesn't know it because the media doesn't publish it. So to answer your question directly with that anecdote in mind, the simple reality is that the African National Congress is steeped in communism. It is steeped in a belief system that is anti-God, anti-values, anti-family, pro-abortion, pro-homosexuality, pro-everything that is liberal.
Wow.
And the result is that they act driven by self-interest rather than a benevolent altruism. It's never about how many bridges should we build so that people can get from place to place and the economy can expand. It's how many bridges shall we build so that our friends can steal the money from it. In our last auditor's report, which is an interim report, there is 30 billion missing. The previous report, which covered a much longer period, revealed over 700 billion missing. Cannot be accounted for. Nobody knows where it is. And those of us who have been close to these things can tell you, not as an opinion, but as a statement of fact, that on any project that the government is responsible for, between 40 and 60% of the funds devoted from the state treasury to that project will be taken by the people who are controlling the project, whether it's the president or the ministers of the cabinet or So that's why we're in this terrible state. The government looks after itself. The police force is in such a bad condition. You know, if you think about rape and murder and why aren't the police doing a better job? The police force is in such a bad condition that the police force, you can look this up if it sounds impossible to believe, is now presently employing private security companies to protect the police stations.
I believe it. I absolutely believe it. That's incredible. But it's amazing because that's the same kind of patterns happen when when, for example, we were talking about Ukraine and we have the destabilization process. You know, these big funders of the during the break we're talking about as puppet masters funding these major race baiting identity politics. You know, there's a whole psychological sort of not treatise but lectures that are given by Dr. Peterson out of University of Toronto. I'm sorry, and he's talking about how the left. After the failure of Marxism, communism in the 20th century, started in academia trying to shift, kind of hide behind a different guise of identity politics, really shifting class warfare into identity politics, and then sort of reviving their dead ideology, which had murdered over 100 million people in the last century. I mean, one of the most vile, wicked, evil, my father always referred to as political Satanism, which actually creates the environment for real Satanism. I'm talking about baby killings, child rituals, pedophilia. That actual satanic practices become part and politically protected, and that, of course, we call political Satanism. And how the left failed on all fronts because they didn't have their little Marxist revolution worldwide, and capitalism didn't implode into Marxism as he predicted, and of course incorrectly predicted, and it just murdered and genocided so many people. Yet you have all these people who will wear, these little young people now in the modern day in America, they're running around campus with hammer and sickle flags, and that's as more vile than having a swastika flag actually, because the ideology of Marxism, the anti-God, anti-family, hateful ideology that murdered, even just in China alone, 77 to 80 million poor Asian people. I mean, they're hiding behind these banners and they think it's fine. And we have 20% of the academics in colleges who are openly Marxist. I mean, how can that be? It's crazy.
Yes. They call it, I didn't know this term until I went to America. We've just toured the USA for 6 months, and people described to me the concept of the long march through the institutions. And when that penny dropped in my mind, it made so much clear. They have so systematically acted in their own interests rather than in the interests of merit. It's almost like a kind of let's say a race-based thing. Let's say I wanted to I was worked for a corporation, and I somehow had the ability to ensure that only white people got employed. I could gradually employ the racist kind of KKK whites and say to them, right, when you employ somebody beneath you, you do the same again. And that's what the Marxists have effectively done through all the institutions so well, particularly in Europe and in North America, other places too, South Africa, but particularly there. They've managed to perpetuate themselves by surrounding themselves with people who think like them, to the point where they've managed to divide science. If you look into science, any science, biology, zoology, whatever, there are certain scientific principles that are applied. When it comes to the humanities, they can teach things like, Margaret Mead's theories of gender that make no scientific sense whatsoever. I mean, none at all. And get away with it because because they're surrounded by people who are clapping and cheering for them.
Well, it's so amazing. It's like they're getting us onto all these little identity ghettos in which we're all divided, and then they can play each party off against each other. And when it's politically, beneficial for their party to centralize more power and to get more, quote, minority groups, which is an never-ending list of new minority groups that are being added just to keep them on little slave plantations of identity politics, so that those little communities can be controlled by handlers who are operators out of those, institutions, the far left institutions, which then, of course, control the media and then are bombarding our children and control our education and public schools, you name it. I mean, it's just, in America, for example, one example is like the NRA, which is the National Rifle Association, fighting for, Second Amendment rights, gun ownership for all Americans, black, white, Asian, you name it. Yes. And they existed to arm black people to fight against Ku Klux Klan members in the late 60s and 70s. And then now, but now the media and the black handlers who are, working with the CIA, FBI, and federal bureaucracies, they've now got the black communities believing that the NRA is racist when it was arming blacks to fight against the KKK members. It's amazing.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And our organization is constituted under international law as a civil defense organization. So that's our legal identity, but we have another identity, which is fundamentally our ethos. What do we believe and how do we feel about things? And we can be described as ardently Christian conservative. So speaking from that point of view, I think I say to people, you mustn't be surprised that you can't persuade others to understand these truths, because they're simple truths. They're almost mathematical. They're indisputable. Anybody can see them. But if somebody doesn't have the Spirit in them, if they do not have the Spirit of God, they are never going to see things the way that Christian conservatives do. And I say to people, yes, it's not a rhetorical question. Answer me, what do you think these people are going to feel about your conservatism? I mean, tell me literally. Obviously, they're going to hate it because they lack the Spirit to receive it. It makes a tremendous difference. And therefore, if I may say so, our mentality is to become fairly insular, because to be an individual in a sea of depravity is very, very difficult. But if you have a little community of 10 families or 100 families that share the same values and ensure that their schools are sort of sanitized and that they do things together and cooperate with one another, then you've got a chance of surviving. So I don't mean to give a theological lecture, but it seems an almost obvious thread to follow,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for example, the white farmers who are being targeted for genocide and being massacred and murdered just, while they're out there, tending their crop or herding their, animals, whatever. I mean, just insane. Is there anywhere in South Africa, how are they able to defend themselves if they're attacked by, criminals, for example?
Well, there is a phenomenon that became very, very well known in South Africa in the 1980s, when the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party and the Congress of South African Trades Unions worked very hard to destroy apartheid. And it's the phenomenon of intimidation. Now, if there's a farmer and he's got some employees, and they go to the one guy and say, look, we need you to get us into this farmhouse. Otherwise, we're going to gut your wife in front of you. He's liable to do it. This is a communist tactic that many people can tell you about who were witness to the events of the 1980s and the early 90s. It was very commonly understood. So often there's an insider in the job. In other cases, it's a little bit more simple. It might be the case of the guys hide in the bush and they wait for the farmer to come home. They monitor the farm for a few weeks and they get an idea of the movements. Every Wednesday night, he goes to the golf club or whatever it may be. He comes home at about 10 o'clock. When he comes in, they surround him, or they will kill the dogs in advance. There's a poison called two-step that is widely used in South Africa. And they say that once an animal eats it, on a piece of meat or whatever, they can only take 2 steps before they die. And, so they will kill the dogs, and the farmer will drive in and thinking, well, I've got all these dogs to protect me. He drives in, gets out of his vehicle, and suddenly there are 4 revolvers in his face. So there are different means of achieving the end.
Is there any ability for citizens, for example, in South Africa, law-abiding citizens, to have, for example, arms to defend themselves from non-law-abiding criminals?
Yes. There is a fallacy that we may not possess arms, but it is a fallacy. We may possess arms legally. We may not possess automatic weapons, but semi-automatic weapons, a rifle. It's fairly easy to get a license for a handgun, a shotgun, and or a hunting rifle. Once it becomes a semi-automatic rifle, it's a little bit more difficult. Once you want 2 of something, it's a little bit more difficult again. Once you want all 3 of the various categories, or 4 categories, if you include semi-automatic, it's more difficult again. But in principle, to have 1 or 2 of that selection is reasonably easy. It takes a couple of months. You have to write a test, and you have to do a practical examination, and you have to submit an application with a testimonial saying that Pastor Moon is a nice guy, I've known him for 20 years, blah, blah, blah. So it's not very easy like it is in America, but it's easy enough.
Do you have to be a part of a hunting club to get access to those permits?
You don't have to be, but it's very beneficial.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so I would say that's closer to the Europe system, because in America you don't need any of that. You can just in Pennsylvania, for example, all you need is a driver's license. You can buy 10 AR-15s if you want.
It's a bit difficult for us to understand. I mean, even we as right-wing conservative people and people who admire the American way of doing things, we sometimes wonder, how can it just seems like an invitation to trouble sometimes.
I know, emotionally that's true. It's interesting because in our county, where we have a very high population of hunters and NRA and gun people, we have one of the lowest crime rates in the world. I mean, we have 1.3 homicides per 100,000, which is like one of the lowest in the world. In terms of homicides, so there's no criminals in our area that would dare charge into a home because grandma may pull out an AR-15, a rod of iron, to punish the wicked.
Well, yes, it's funny you should say that. It's going to sound as if I'm contradicting myself now, but I'll say it anyway. I watched a video clip by a chap called Bill Whittle, an American guy, who correlated
I've seen that, yeah.
Crime rates with gun possession rates, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Where there are no guns, the crime is rampant. Where there are guns, there's none. So even if it sounds like I'm sort of double talking here, talking with forked tongue, I'll admit that it was quite an impressive statistic to see.
Well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back after this segment with more with Mr. Roche, Simon Roche. Stay with us.
At the range today, I just learned a new technique from the father of the .44 Magnum, Elmer Keith, which is called shooting out of the notch, which allows you to make really long distance shots and still have an extremely precise sight picture. So I brought my CW9 car down, and with this little gun, we're gonna shoot this little munchkin at 200 yards up in the hills, applying this technique, and hopefully we'll make the shot. To apply this technique, instead of using the blade of the front sight lined up with the top of the rear sight, I'm going to take the dot of the front sight and raise it up so that it's out of the notch, but I'm still going to keep the front sight on my target. Bringing that front sight up like that is going to compensate for the bullet drop over that excessively long distance with just this little gun. So if applied right, we should be making contact. Let's see how it goes. I saw this shot, so I'm a little bit out of breath because you gotta run to make sure that is what I thought it was, and it was. So while making this shot, from that distance with these white dot sights, it literally would cover the entire target. You couldn't see what you were shooting. So using the Elmer Keith technique, you were able to raise it out of the back notch. I can't breathe. Out of the back notch, allowing you to keep your accuracy, aim, and also still see the target, which is key because it was a hard shot, not gonna lie. But yeah, it went great, and Elmer knows what he's talking about. And for such a small gun to be able to take that hit, I'm very impressed with this. All right, guys, be sure to like and share, and I'll see you out on the range. That was awesome. Hey, can I try that one? Yeah, let's do it with the 380. Does everybody have eyes and ears?
And we are back. Second King reporting live to all the kings and queens of the kingdom of God. We are co-heirs with Christ, folks. Crowns and the rod of iron with which he will rule the nations and free us from all this insanity, this political Satanism. He'll wipe every tear from our eyes. That doesn't mean he'll get rid of all suffering, but he'll wipe the tears of all the suffering that has happened under the kingdoms of Satan. And the Bible says we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of the wickedness, and rulers in high places, spiritual wickedness in high places. We are fighting a cosmic battle, folks. This is not just, left versus right, et cetera, et cetera. These are civilizations that are starting to clash. And here, of course, we're joined with Mr. Simon Roche, a true patriot of South Africa, trying to fight for his country. So many death threats, assaulted many times. Simon, can you tell us a little about what you were telling us during the break? I mean, of how your life has been under threat many, many times.
Yes. Well, I was pointing out to you that I have a number of scars. My skull was crushed in an assault once, and it's never healed really on the upper right side. So there are fissures in my skull. I have a big dagger wound in my upper right back, a separate incident. I have an axe wound down. You can barely see it through my beard and mustache, but I had quite a bad axe. I was chopped quite badly by an axe in my front face. I've been shot at a few times from fairly short distances in 2 different cities, 2 incidents. My father they attempted to assassinate him, put him on his knees, and he was praying, and they pulled the trigger twice, and the gun didn't fire twice. And so they kind of, they ran away. We all have stories to tell. I mentioned to you that when I began doing this work, a police agent, a known police agent, whom I knew, by the way, phoned me and said, look, I'm phoning you because I genuinely like you. I think you're a great guy, and I just want to warn you that you're going to be the first guy. Well, he first endeavored to entice me to become a traitor to my cause. He said, come over to our side and we'll look after you, blah, blah, blah. And when that failed, he said to me, he phoned me back, in fact, a second phone call. He said, well, look, in light of what you said to me previously, you're not interested in working with us. I want you to know that you're going to be the first that we kill. And we're going to put a gun to your head and put a bullet in your brain. Those were his words.
Wow.
And he said it's for two reasons. He said the first is because you're doing this talking. And he said the second reason is, separate from the fact that you're talking, is that you're saying things that people are listening to. And we can't have that. We can't have you giving a different narrative than the accepted liberal narrative. He didn't use these exact words, but this was what he was getting at. The accepted liberal narrative of the new South African rainbow nation. And then in the past few months, a friend of mine who is very well connected with the African National Congress, very nice man, has my best interests at heart, who I can say loves me, contacted me and said, look, I don't know how to say this to you, but I need to tell you that you're going to die. And I said to him, okay, well, what's the story? He said, look, I can't say any more, but I'm telling you, you know where I'm coming from. He said, I'm warning you. So he phoned me on 3 separate occasions because I didn't give up after the first one. He phoned me the second time and then the third time to say, look, don't you understand? You're going to be killed. I am your warning. This is your chance. Give it up. So, yes, what can you do? You just have to sort of march forward, Pastor.
Wow. I mean, talk about, I mean, in that type of atmosphere, wow. I mean, how important is your faith to hold on to Christ and to know that there is a persecution of the righteous in the end of days, and then that his kingdom is coming. How important is your faith to keep you centered in all that incredible, threats and turmoil and all that havoc around?
Well, I suppose the best way to put it is I was degenerate when I was young. I was a very, 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 very wicked man. And I am in the fortunate position now of being at peace with the fact that I'm doing something to the greater glory of God. And if it should cost me my life, I can't say I did everything right, I was a well-behaved guy, I never caused harm to other people, I didn't hurt women, therefore it's unfair. I'm in the ironically fortunate position of being able to say, I had it all my own way, now I must take it as it comes to me. I can't whine about my own fate. And that happens within a Christian kind of paradigm, without Christ, it just couldn't possibly be. And we've been through some difficult times in recent years, and it's only faith in God that gives me the next morning and the next step forward. There's nothing else at all. There's no courage, there's no strength, there's no enthusiasm, there's no nothing except for him. And I can say that without exaggeration because I know when I've crumbled. I know when I was cheap and when I sold out. I know when I reverted to bad behavior. So I know that it's not my courage that's brought me this far. It's the prayers that I've said in the morning and in the night, the next day, that have allowed me to continue, not me.
Wow, the Bible says, be afraid not of those who can take away your flesh, but he who can condemn your spirit, your soul. And it's, in that kind of scenario, I've been just fascinated with the work of Dr. Peterson he's a clinical psychologist out of Toronto, taught at Harvard for about 7 or 8 years, but he's talking about, even with Nietzsche and some of the late 1800s or 19th century philosophers, thinkers, they were saying, look, God is, quote, dead in our Western civilization, post-industrial situation in the late 1800s, but it's going to be at great peril to humanity, because once the foundational framework of meaning is taken out, and this, what he called the sort of the God ideal, this idea that, you know, there is a creator who is benevolent, who is beyond time and space, that is intelligent, and that is good, fundamentally good. Once that's stripped away from humanity, it's not like how the new neo-atheists like Sam Harris say, we're just all going to become rationalists and we're all going to become scientists. It's going to degrade into tremendous genocidal, pathological ideologies that will take over and lead to hundreds of millions of deaths. Because the state will take the place of God, and the state is this cold, centralized, predatory agency where human sovereignty is taken away, and it's coercive force used to, you know, take taxation or used to force the population to go in a certain way. And Nietzsche actually, even though he didn't like the Christian upbringing, he hated the idea that if God is eradicated from our consciousness as humanity, we will suffer greatly. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes, yes. And you see it. There's a direct proportion. You know, in the societies that have the most liberal constitutions, you have the greatest amount of this destruction. And South Africa, our government proudly touts our constitution as the most liberal in the world. So it is the most liberated from God. It's the most liberated from a moral compass with a true north. It's the most liberated from moral absolutism. It is postmodernist, humanist, moral relativist, through and through. And what do we have? We have reports, as we had on television the other day, of an 11-year-old girl who'd had 8 state-funded abortions. 11 years old, 8 abortions. This is what is happening in our country. It's beyond perversity.
Incredible. Wow.
And you can bet your bottom dollar that it's not happening in Saudi Arabia, where they have, it's not Christianity. So, you know, I'm speaking as a Christian. Obviously, I'm not pro that, but I'm saying where you have moral absolutism, where you have firm guidelines as to social conduct, where you have baser instincts curtailed by a theological paradigm, you have reasonably healthy societies. You certainly don't have societies in which rape and murder are rampant, and abortion is occurring at the rate of, you know, whatever, 50% of all pregnancies. You know, our murder rate, you said yours is 1.3, homicides 1.3 per 100,000 in your county. Ours is 52 per 100,000.
Wow. Tremendous. I mean, it was interesting you say that because we had Zachary King on about a couple months ago, maybe 2 months ago, and he was a former Satanist for 26 years as the high priest in the Satanist cult. And he is the one who exposed Planned Parenthood as being a breeding ground and a collecting ground for Satanists, Luciferians, and Wiccans that would gather there to have access to the fetuses to do black masses and rituals to the babies, because they're literally doing this for the pleasure of Satan and their historical rituals as well. And so the abortion business is not only murdering children, it's now being a sort of a church. It's becoming like an underground church for actual Satanists, you know? And of course, I'm sure you've seen the Planned Parenthood videos where they're selling baby parts for profit, etc., hundreds of thousands of dollars in babies. I mean, this is exactly what Lucifer and Satan would manifest.
Oh, I can't bear it. I can't bear it. I can't bear to hear it.
It's really real Satanism that is manifesting on the earth in the guise of progressivism, in the guise of women's health services. You can't get a mammogram or an ultrasound at Planned Parenthood. It's not about women's health services. It's about killing babies. That's all you can do. You can only kill babies, the next generation of human life. And it's like, it's unbelievable. This becomes it's incredible. It's unbelievable. And, you know, it's part of like the civilization. You can see the funding that George Soros and the international bankers, the puppet masters, so to speak, they're always funding this stuff. They're always trying to lower the age limit of sexual consent. The UN is trying to push it down to 10 years old. They're pushing health services, classes in public education in Chicago, teaching 5-year-old children how to masturbate. I mean, they're just destroying innocence and destroying human life. Because they know if they get that fruit early on, you know, it's like the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You get that fruit too early on, you're going to be one with the devil. And it's going to mess up your life, your whole life, and you're going to be recovering, you know, from traumatic, you know, situations. Yes. And you're going to be easier to control.
Oh, Pastor, what are we doing to our poor children? What are we doing to these poor, innocent babies?
It's really a travesty. It's really such a sin before God. I mean, you know, that it's unbelievable. And we're so thankful for Trump and Pence. You know, they're trying to at least bring light to this issue. We have 54 million children that have been eradicated. Over 50% of blacks are not born out of the womb. The most dangerous place to be for blacks in America is in a womb.
Is right in now. The womb.
It's incredible. It's supposed to be the safest, most nourishing, nurturing place, and yet now it's the most dangerous. And I mean, you talk about South Africa and the pro-abortion, the pro-breaking up of the family, the pro-sexual revolution, the free sex culture. I mean, it seems that all these Satanists at the top, and now their pedophile rings are being exploded. I mean, now the pedophile scandals are now starting to just become totally exposed with Bill Clinton and Jerry Epstein and Kevin Spacey and Hollywood and the UK royal family and Jimmy Savile and Sir Edward Heath being a necrophile. All this stuff is coming out, and we're now starting to see that the actual elite in the world are actual Satanists doing actual Satanist things.
Yes, yes.
It's mind-boggling. Yes. It's mind-boggling.
Yes. Well, hopefully our God will hear the cries of the blood from the ground of those unborn babies and those children who've had pedophilia practiced upon them, and He will step in because they have gotten away with murder in a literal and metaphorical sense for so long that it's, you know, far be it from me to condemn God, but I mean, now hopefully He will come in and take their side, and these things will continue to be exposed as they have been recently, and properly exposed. Let these people let us know to the last one who they are.
Well, it's like people like you, yourself, and your organization, and those who are trying to transcend this tribal politics and this race-baiting politics and say, hey, we're all people, we're all human beings creating the image of God. Hey, this is the foundation of Western civilization. You know, the idea that we're created in the image of God and we're innocent until proven guilty. Stop killing people just because some politician tells you and tries to stir up victimhood in you and sort of resentment in you to want to destroy other people. It's either you believe in humanity or you don't. I mean, it's either you're going to take God's side or you're going to take Satan's side. And it's unbelievable that now this stuff is becoming exposed to the light of day. And people like you, Simon, who are standing up for your country, you're fighting at the threat of your life on a daily basis, being stabbed, hit with axes. My goodness, something that, you know, we just can't fathom. It's more dangerous to be in South Africa a farmer than it is to be a soldier. I mean, this is the state of affairs now in your part of the world.
Well, as a matter of interest to you, a similar statistic is that it is almost half, 0.44, almost half as dangerous to be a white South African 3-year-old girl as it was to be an infantryman in Vietnam. That is a mathematical fact. Your chances of being murdered as a white South African of any age or gender, this is farmers aside, is almost half the chance of dying in combat in Vietnam. And those statistics, by the way, were generated in the USA from original sources. It was an American mechanical engineer who presented that information to us with all of the original sources, and we had it verified by an independent American organization. This is not something we made up. Almost half as dangerous to be a living, breathing 3-year-old girl if you are white in South Africa as it was to be an infantryman in combat in Vietnam.
I mean, it's, oh wow, it just hearing that, it really just comes to the fact that in the end, you know, God gave dominion of the world to Adam and Eve, his children, not to the archangel. But the archangel always wants to come in. He's supposed to be the servant, but he always wants to become the master. And that's what you see with the federalized, you know, forces. You see that with the federalized governments that rule the world. You see that with the federalized police that becomes a strong arm of those federalized bureaucracies, which then attract, you know, pathological predators to their ranks. And you see the archangel taking the place not of the servant, but of the master over Adam and Eve and over humanity, men and women. You know, and so we can, it's just like the Bible, the garden is like replaying itself over and over again in time of humanity. But again, it's good people like yourself and patriots around the country, around the world that stand up and say, no, we are children of God. We are not slaves. We are not slaves. We are children of God, Almighty God. His blood runs through our veins. We are co-heirs with Christ in his kingdom, and your evil will end. One day your evil will end, and God will, you know, the Bible says, let no man take thy crown. He will crown us in sovereignty. He will crown us with freedom from you. He will crown us with the gifts of the Spirit and the gifts of dominion that he's given us from time immemorial. And one day, the good, the sheepdog, the sheep who follow the shepherd will stand in righteousness and victory over all this spiritual wickedness.
Yeah, we just have to stand together. You know, we're a legal organization. We're non-seditionist, Sakelanders, and non-insurrectionist. And we are, as you can imagine, saturated with spies. You know, we're a thorn in the side of our government because we're not politically correct. And if we were doing anything illegal, we would have been exposed a long time ago. But no case has ever been brought against it. We are scrupulously legal, and I need to say this before I make the point that I wish to make, so that nobody misunderstands it. We don't encourage civil disobedience. People, I beg your pardon, a gnat just flew right down my throat. We don't encourage people not to pay taxes, etc., etc. But
right.
Recently, we had a terrible incident in South Africa in a very popular restaurant chain, very, very famous, very popular, in which there was a race-based incident, and it was handled very badly by the restaurant chain. They handled it in a very, very politically correct way, completely politically correct. And so a boycott was generated against this restaurant chain by Christian conservatives. And the effect has been so huge that it has destroyed the price of potatoes in South Africa. Because they serve so many French fries, this massive dominant chain, it has reduced demand, and the effect is that it has ruined the price of potatoes, and farmers are planting other things. The point being that we say to people, if Google offends you by its support of lesbian, gay, bisexual, what, and children being exposed to pornography, if that offends you, then you and your friends must use Bing or DuckDuckGo or StartPage as your search engines. You can't sponsor the strangulation of your own children, because then it is on your head. If you know that these people do not have the interests of Christ at heart, if you know that they are acting against Christ, that it is ultimately a satanic thing, and yes, you, for your own convenience, continue to endorse it, then it is on your head. You need to be selective about, it's not about civil disobedience. It's about saying that obviously, bisexuals, whatever, would be thrilled when Google openly endorses that kind of thing. Now, reciprocally, we should not be thrilled. We should turn our backs on it. We should not be the funders, the sponsors of the strangulation of our children. And it really is as simple as that. There's no more, with respect, I don't mean to sound arrogant or haughty, but there is no more to be said on the subject. It is that simple. And we Westerners, you and I, with respect, Pastor, we are our own worst enemies because we've continued to buy into these things that hate us so much and hate our Christ and hate the blood of our Christ. And we keep going back for more over and over and over again. We have nobody to blame but our own selves.
You know, that's such an important point as we finish our broadcast today, because it's never been this easy to fight evil. Never, never, never. You just literally have to do what Simon said. You literally have to just stop using their platforms, stop giving them power, stop buying from Amazon, stop reading the Washington Post. It's never been this easy. I mean, it's not like we actually have to go to war. I mean, at this point, I mean, but you know, but it's so easy. You can just share a link. You can just, you know, forward Simon's video to somebody. You can just get the word out. It's never been easy to literally save, you know, Judeo-Christian civilization, upon which Western civilization is built upon and jurisprudence is built upon, by literally clicking a button. I mean, it's never been this easy. So there's really no excuse for us not to be engaged, for us not to, as a body of Christ, not speaking out against this stuff, because it's never been this easy. It's never been this easy. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. Wow, it's just an honor to be able to meet you and to be able to hear what you're doing. My goodness, we are praying for you. Please let us know about any of your websites that you have before we end our broadcast today.
Yes, certainly. If people are interested in donating to the work that we're doing, the difficult, hard work that we're doing, we ask them, please, we appreciate every single cent. It allows us to continue. And they can donate on the website suidlanders.org, suidlanders.org. In the bottom right-hand corner are links to Bitcoin and to PayPal. And we are bitterly grateful, especially at this dark time in our country, for any financial support that enables us to continue to prepare for the crisis that is almost upon us.
Folks, you heard it. Suidlanders.com. Is it suidlanders.com?
.org.
Suidlanders.org. That is suidlanders.org to support Simon and all the folks down there who are trying to fight to transcend this race-based politics and to try to move their nation forward. This is a man who's been attacked, axed in the face, stabbed in the back, literally shot at. I mean, they are risking their lives. Every single ounce of support, prayers helps. So we're just so grateful to have you, Simon. Please stay safe. We're praying for you and your work. God bless you and God bless your work. That is suidlanders.org. We'll put the link down on the video. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us this day. We will see you tomorrow, 5 a.m. sharp on the King's Report. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come. Simon, thanks so much for joining us.
Church, we pray, revive this earth. Build your kingdom.